Hey, Donny. Yeah, you, Donald Trump, the orange guy. Ugh. Remember a while back when there was a big hullabaloo about this?
Do you know whether the president ever tore up notes when he was finished with them?
Yes.
Basically, his aides are cleaning up after him. They're taking the waste paper basket or the paper that's tossed on the floor from the residence and from the Oval, and they are bringing it over to the records management team, who are then scotch taping it back together.
And why do you think those staffers were doing that? Do you think they just enjoyed following your sloppy ass around? No, they were doing that to comply with the Presidential Records Act, or PRA. Now, you've recently had some pretty interesting things to say about the PRA, like
the decision to segregate personal materials from presidential records is made by the president during the president's term and in the president's sole discretion.
And
the president has every right to keep whatever he wants, and that includes me.
But in reality, those claims are the exact polar opposite of what the Presidential Records Act actually says. So for the benefit of all your stupid cult members who still eat up all the bullshit that you serve to them, let's do some learning about the PRA, shall we? PRA 101. The Presidential Records Act of 1978 governs the official records of presidents and vice presidents, beginning with the Reagan administration. The PRA covers a lot of ground, so let's just look at the most relevant points, okay? But first, some important definitions about presidential records versus personal records. According to the PRA, presidential records are documentary materials like books, correspondence, memoranda, documents, papers, pamphlets, works of art, models, pictures, photographs, plats, maps, films, and motion pictures, including but not limited to audio and visual record or other electronic or mechanical recordations, whether in analog, digital, or any other form, created or received by the president or the president's staff, which relate to or have an effect upon the duties of the president. Basically, presidential records include everything that a president creates or receives that isn't a personal record, right? So what are personal records? Well, they're documentary materials like books, correspondence, memoranda, blah, 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 of a purely private or non-public character which do not relate to the carrying out of the duties of the president. So, for example, Donald, your personal records would include your mocked-up magazine covers, your framed pictures of your creepy, grifting family, and stuff like your
golf shirts, clothing, pants, shoes.
Yeah, anything like that. So with the definition of presidential records in mind, let's get back to what the law says about them. Well, boiling it down, the PRA establishes public ownership of all presidential records, places the responsibility for the custody and management of incumbent presidential records with the president, and establishes the presidential records automatically transfer into the legal custody of the archivist as soon as the president leaves office. In other words, presidential records never belong to a president. So, former President Trump, when you refer to presidential records as
my own presidential papers,
you're either mistaken, which isn't hard to believe because you're a moron, or you're just plain lying because, after all, you are also
a pathological liar.
Interestingly, the PRA also allows the sitting president to dispose of records that no longer have value, but not before NARA has given their views on that disposal in writing. Without approval from NARA, the president doesn't get to destroy anything, much less
rip up documents and throw pieces in the toilet.
Also, keep in mind that as soon as a president leaves office, he's supposed to take his personal stuff home while handing the presidential records over to NARA. That's why the PRA clearly states that documentary materials produced or received by the president or the president's staff shall, to the extent practicable, be categorized as presidential records or personal records upon their creation or receipt and be filed separately. So when you, single-term President Trump, say this,
and in my case I took it out pretty much in a hurry, but people packed it up and we left. And I had clothing in there, I had all sorts of personal items in there, much stuff.
You're basically admitting that you were violating the PRA during your entire time in office. Shocking, I'm shocked. So that's the Presidential Records Act in a tiny little summarized nutshell. But before we dismiss the class, Donald,
let's review.
Where unclassified documents are concerned, they don't belong to you. They belong to the country. You can't have them. Next, classified documents from your single term in office also don't belong to you. They belong to the country. You can't have them. And finally, any once classified documents that you successfully declassified during the short time that you were president still don't belong to you. They belong to the country. Declassifying something doesn't make it yours. You were legally obligated to turn all of your presidential records over to to narrow once you were kicked out of office.
First of all, I won in 2020 by a lot, okay?
No, you didn't. You lost by millions of votes to a 10,000-year-old man. But regardless, you don't get to keep any presidential records.
The president has every right to keep whatever he wants.
Oh, for crying out loud. Have you been listening at all? Get out of my classroom.